I'm Representative Berg, and thank you for coming on this wonderful Tuesday into my kitchen. We have an absolutely fantastic show planned for you today. We're going to be talking about childcare as infrastructure. It is something on the top of everyone's mind. Number one question I get all over this district and honestly all over the state. I have got the absolute best guest to talk to us about childcare as infrastructure, Representative Tana Send, who I'm excited to call not just a guest on the show, but a friend and colleague. So, Tana, welcome to my kitchen and welcome to Kitchen Conversations.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm incredibly honored.
Yeah, and I was honored that you said yes. Just to be real, I'm a fangirl, and so now that we're colleagues, I kind of like I just want to call you Rep Sen all day. So it's fantastic that you made time for this.
Absolutely.
And I'm gonna let you
talk about childcare. I am all in.
Right. And that's exactly it, because you've been doing the work. And tell folks at home just who you are and just a little bit about your background and why this is a passion point for you.
Sure, thanks. So I represent the 41st District, which is in East King County also, from Renton up through Sammamish, including Newcastle, Mercer Island, Bellevue, Issaquah, and Sammamish, and Beaux-Arts Village. And I chair the Children, Youth, and Families Committee. Before I was in the legislature, I've been in the legislature for 8 years. I was a Mercer Island City Councilwoman, but really wanted to get and got involved in City Council because of the need for safe routes to school, and then went really to the legislature because I wanted to focus. We needed transportation, we needed childcare, we needed quality education, and all of that, ironically, is childcare as infrastructure. And just knew that if we had too much traffic, parents couldn't get home to the dining room table. They were late to pick up their kids at childcare, would get a fee. If their kids weren't getting a good education, then everything else was moot. So that's why I went to the state level, and I've really enjoyed it.
I can tell you, as a mom and a parent stuck in traffic some of those days, I am so thankful that you decided to jump in like that. And I think part of your background, when I think about it and listen to you, you talk about the varied positions you've had. You can't de-link childcare from the economy. Mm-hmm. And so as we talk about childcare as infrastructure, and some folks push back, they say, wait a minute, infrastructure is roads and bridges and buses, and that's true. But to your point, if we don't have access to childcare, we don't even have the luxury of getting in our car to go to work, right? If someone's not watching our kids. So as a policy, what have you done statewide as a policy to help our state get kind of a leg up on childcare, but connecting it with the economy?
Sure. Well, this legislative session, we passed the Fair Start for Kids Act, which is a landmark piece of legislation in Washington state. And as I've talked with other states around the country, really for the country as well. And we really focused on making sure that we were expanding accessibility and affordability of childcare, making sure we were supporting the childcare workforce, which is a huge issue. And they are our heroes, our essential workers. They are the backbone of our economy right now. Yeah. And also just making sure we're helping families with early intervention services, even if they're not in the childcare arena. And so we focused on mental health. We focused on equity. Again, we made sure that we got health care for our childcare workers. Mm-hmm. I mean, to be in a pandemic and not have access to health care when our schools are closed, but childcares are open, that was just untenable. So It really was focused on the entire ecosystem and kind of the business sector of childcare to really make sure that we were supporting childcare and getting families more access to it.
And that's huge. Just listening to everything you said, it was a multi-pronged approach. I mean, this wasn't just let's throw dollars at it or let's add a center here or there. I mean, this was really a multi-pronged systemic approach to childcare. I feel like the feds are just catching up, right? Like, I feel like the conversations you've driven in our state, the feds are just kind of catching up. And so that said, right, there's some specific barriers for people, and they are financial, but some of it's municipal. I know there was some legislation that tried to break down some of those municipal barriers as well. But talk to folks a little bit about those financial barriers, because it's not cheap. And why is that? How can we help?
Yeah. So when we think about childcare, it's kind of a broken market right now. in that childcare can't charge more because families can't afford to pay more. And yet the cost of actually running childcare is so expensive, mainly around staffing. You need to pay workers. And as childcare is, as jobs in other sectors are paying more, it's less appealing to be in childcare and work there if you're going to be working so many hours for such few dollars. So that is definitely a huge barrier, because childcare is more expensive than college at this point in Washington State. And you can save for college. You can't really save for childcare. You're at the beginning of your career, usually, when you have young kids who are going to childcare. It's one of the biggest, like the fourth biggest expense for families after food and rent and other items. So it's a huge aspect. So we need to make sure that we are supporting childcare in a way that allows workers to get their education, to have enough benefits, to want to stay in the field, and making sure that families can afford it, whether it's not making sure that it doesn't cost as much, but also just that they can find it.
Yeah. That's so true. And it sounds like, I mean, just listening to you, it's professionalism, right? Like, I don't feel like structurally we treat childcare as a profession. And so as a result, folks aren't having a job where you care for the absolute most precious thing in someone's life and not having healthcare yourself seems backwards in the worst possible way.
Yeah, well, you know that more than anybody as a school board member. And, I think still a lot of people think of childcare as babysitting. It is absolutely not. I mean, the brain development that goes on for kids between 0 and 5 is the biggest growth in, any time in your life. And if we can make sure that that's a robust area, kids are really set for life. Childcare and early learning helps reduce special education needs. A lot of times early intervention eliminates the need for special education. It gives kids the social emotional learning skills. And then what you were saying at the beginning, it's also an economic imperative. Parents need a safe place for their kids to go that's high quality, so that they can go to work and not have to stress about their kids.
Absolutely. And focus on work, not just go, but focus. Because I remember being that mom, looking at, well, I'll tell you how old I am, looking at my pager, making sure that there wasn't an issue with one of my kiddos. But I will say it's, it's talking with you about the financial barriers before coming on today. I just want to let folks at home know I don't have kids in childcare. I will totally own that. So I had to go online to Google, what it costs, because I'm just curious. Just, what does that mean? It was, and there were some different metrics you could apply to the standard. How many, the teacher ratio, where you were. Basic was about $1,700 a month. And doing the research, talking to my girlfriends that have kids in childcare, they said you're lucky if you have the option to pay that because there's so few spots. So, listening to you about the structural, the systemic issues and how it really is a broken model makes sense, because at no point do you see, your local childcare worker kind of balling out in Gucci all day. That's not where the money's going. It's going to take care of your kids in a safe and a reasonable way.
And you just for $1,700. That's for if you have one child, let alone if you have a couple or 3, and it's more expensive if you have an infant. And I often think about the struggle. So, God bless Washington State, we have a paid family leave, right? Which is amazing. But then after those 3 months and you want to go back to work, first of all, if you haven't already signed up for and been, on a wait list for childcare, chances are you might not find it. And so if we, you think about like the joys of that, and your biggest stress is, having the child, and then, you get to be all cuddly and figure this out and want to go back to work. And that might not be feasible because you don't have a childcare slot, let alone one that you can afford.
And that is so true.
Really, really expensive.
Yeah, and I didn't do infant care. I will say I did it for a traditional kind of, I think it was over toddler age, like about 2-year-old. You could put in different things. And you're right, infant care is so, so much more. So and that could be, again, depends on your area. And I know folks in rural areas have very specific challenges with acts as well as the finances. So talk to me a little bit about that. What are some of those challenges, and how, from a policy perspective, could we help alleviate some of them?
Yeah, one of the biggest things right now in the rural areas and urban areas, frankly, is the actual physical locations, the physical
Mm,
place for childcare. There's a lot of family homes, which is great, and people can, adapt their basement or their garage or part of their house to service kids,
yeah.
and that's a really wonderful option for a lot of people. But they tend to be smaller than
Hmm.
centers, and so you need many more of them in order to meet more kids. And so just having the physical infrastructure for
Yeah.
childcare is really expensive and hard. And so we have made a lot of investments in Washington State through a program called the Early Learning Facilities Fund that we created a few years ago to help provide capital dollars for
Yeah.
childcare to expand, to build. Um, there's a lot of, and again, in rural areas, there's long distances in between. And
Yep.
so it's, sometimes it's really hard to find a place that's going to work for you on your way to work.
Yeah.
And another big thing, and this applies to the whole infrastructure question too, is childcare tends to be kind of the 7 to 6 workday. But
Yeah.
if you are working on a farm, if you are doing a second shift as a police
Sure.
officer, or in at
Or a
a
nurse.
house
Yeah.
or nurse, I mean, that's exactly the medical
Hmm.
field. Then it's really hard to find childcare. And so, and as we're thinking about construction, and we know people always want construction to happen at night because they don't want it to impact traffic.
Yeah.
And yet, where people's kids
Where do
going
those
at
kids go?
night?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so, there's all those sorts of issues that are compounding for sure.
Yeah, no, and I love the fact that you brought up investment, right? So investing our state, investing capital dollars into making these locations. Because I'll tell you honestly, we hear a lot, you hear a lot about deregulation. I compare it to aerospace and I say, do you want to really deregulate and have less regulations around something so precious, right? You would never say that about any other industry. And so I think the key there is investment, and not saying, oh, we need less regulation, quote unquote, because I will tell you, being a mom, we want to make sure our kiddos are in the safest possible environments when we can't be with them. So, yeah, I think our rural communities definitely. I'm hoping that folks take advantage of some of those capital dollars to make more facilities.
Yeah,
So,
and you just said about the aerospace industry. That's what I
mhm,
say all the time
yeah,
too. And the reason why the aerospace industry works, and
mhm,
we're not trying to take regulation away from the aerospace industry, is because there's a lot of money in it,
exactly.
in the
That's right.
field. And so a lot of the regulations, and there are some, there's health and safety. We
Yep,
want to have the right ratios so that,
that's right.
a provider who's taking care of infants are really keeping their eyes on them while they're sleeping to
Hmm.
make sure there's safe sleep. That kids aren't choking. There's a lot of regulations that are really important. But if we're actually paying
Yeah,
providers enough money to hire enough staff
exactly.
to cover the paperwork, to not have them pulling out their hair about whether or not they're even going to be able to open the next day, then the
Exactly.
regulations aren't onerous. It's when we starve the industry that we really have
Hmm.
regulation problems.
And that's, thank you for that context, because I think the talking points can be, regulation, but you're right, starving the industry to the point where any regulation would be onerous, but we need it to take care of, again, our most precious people in the world. And
Yeah.
so, we're talking about these problems with childcare. We're talking about the barriers, financial, et cetera. And we've gone through really a healthcare crisis lately, COVID, and it's exacerbated so many things, including challenges around childcare. And really, I think there was, it was a healthcare challenge or healthcare pandemic, but also I've heard you say it's a personal pandemic. And so who's bearing the brunt of that? Who in our economy is bearing the brunt of
Mhm.
this pre-existing condition of lack of childcare
Absolutely.
post-COVID, like, because I know someone is, and I think you're going to tell folks maybe something they already know, but they need to hear again.
Yeah. Yeah. We think about the recession because of COVID. And I've been calling it a she session. I mean, it is really about women leaving the workforce.
Yeah.
We're back to 1988 levels of employment for women. And that is dramatically because of caregiving responsibilities, whether it was childcare or caring for a loved one, a sick one. And that, that has financial implications for everybody, and obviously,
Yep.
especially for the woman and her family. And so, without childcare, we are just unable to get people back to work. And if you think about the summer, and even more so with the schools closed during the summer, at least during the year, even if they were doing school from home, they were kind of occupied, if you will. But with summer upon us and no childcare, for any company to expect a woman or a parent to go back to work when there's no childcare and there's no school, I mean, that's just that's just not realistic. And so that childcare is critical to get women back into the workforce. And we worked really closely with the Association of Washington Businesses, and this was one of their biggest priorities. And they, in every field, they knew that without childcare, there was no economic recovery.
Absolutely. And that just ties us back to that first question about it being infrastructure. And so it's interesting when you can get the business folks and childcare folks, education, everybody on the same page saying we got to reopen, but we can only do it if there's someone to take care of the kids. So it really all came to a tipping point, but I love it. She session or she demic, that is absolutely, women are bearing the brunt. So that's why I said I think folks know that, but hearing it, we can't hear it enough because we have to fix it. And so that's why I love the policy work you're doing and the advocacy work that you're doing.
Well, and the other she part of all of this is that the childcare providers themselves are
women.
Mostly women of color. Yeah. And so the equity and the engagement and investments in this is helping women of color, helping communities all across the state. So it's really just such an important investment that's good for business, good for women, good for communities of color, good for kids.
Yep.
It's paramount.
It's huge, and it's one of those things where listening to this, it's a no-brainer. It's like, why haven't we done this before? Why did it take this long to get to this point and to talk about childcare in these terms? But to your point, it's equity, it's everything, it's economic recovery, and it's helping women in the workforce, both sides of it.
You also mentioned the personal pandemic part, and I think, why did it take us so long? I think what COVID really opened people's eyes to is that, some people might have thought, oh, low-income families are having a hard time finding childcare, or are having a hard time eating, finding enough food, affording food. But what we saw during COVID was, more and more middle-class and upper-class families struggling, again, affording food, affording and finding childcare. And so, there was just more and more people advocating and pushing for this. And my hope is that as we go forward, people recognize that when we have these safety net programs, or we have these social investments, they are really there for everyone, not just during a pandemic, but all the time, because individuals have personal pandemics all the time. Whether you lose a job, you have cancer, you are getting divorced, domestic violence, loss of parent, and mental health crisis. I mean, people have personal pandemics all the time. And so for us to have the empathy and the compassion to recognize that, and how hard people still work, and yet sometimes they just, need a community to help them out.
No, absolutely. And I think that you put it perfectly. Like, that is the ultimate soundbite, is that it is, when you say personal pandemic, it really is, it brought it personal. Food security became personal. Childcare became personal. Education. I don't know how many parents told me, I could never be with my kid all day. I don't know how the teachers do it. Well, now they know. And they're just like, oh, that's how that happened. So it really became personal.
Yeah, and one other thing that really became personal is because of Zoom.
Yeah.
The like, and I must mention the business community was really behind this. You know, before, I think a lot of employees were uncomfortable raising the issue of childcare to their
Hmm.
employer, that was a barrier for them. But you couldn't hide it in the, a Zoom call,
Nope.
and you've got the kids running around in the background,
Yep.
and for every
Exactly.
level of profession, from the CEO down. And so it really became something that people had a view into our homes,
Into
our
into our lives.
into our
Hmm.
kitchens,
Yeah.
and childcare was just front and center, and so that really also
Absolutely.
personalized it, and made it a kind of a real humanized it for people.
And that's how change happens, right? Making it human, making something that seems very specific, now making it socialized, and socialized being social, that everybody sees the need for it. Everybody sees that at some point we might be in that scenario. So
Yeah.
it's I can't I remember there was one of our kitchen conversations where one of my kids did walk by, and I think the guest said something to the effect of, she does not care. And it's no, they're kids. They're doing their thing. They want a bagel. Like, what do you do? So it's but everybody got to see it, and that's part of the joy of doing stuff at home. Um,
Absolutely.
I just want to ask you one last question. And for folks at home and folks listening, I know they've heard me ask every guest this season because it's so important. And it's about moonshots. And it's a question about what you would want to see done in this space of childcare, especially as it relates to economic recovery and infrastructure. What would you want to see done that seemed absolutely impossible, but now seems absolutely necessary?
I would like to see every single employer, every single building, everywhere have a childcare that is available.
Yeah.
But really to
Hmm.
make sure that, regardless of where it is, that every family who needs childcare and preschool has an
Yep.
opportunity, so that everybody,
Yeah.
regardless of the color of your skin, of your economic status, of your immigration status, that your kiddos have a chance when they hit kindergarten to hit the ground running, and just focus on their studies and their social emotional learning, and just being happy, successful kids up into adulthood. And that is, if we make that investment, the rest is
Yeah.
just coasting.
Absolutely. Well, I tell you, it's that's the moonshot that I think everyone can get behind. The sad thing is, it shouldn't be a moonshot, right?
Mhm.
That should just be normal. If we can put a man on the moon with a slide ruler, we should be able to get universal childcare. And let's be real, that's how it happened. And now we have everything else, but we should be able to get the basics if we can do the impossible. So, Representative Tonneson, thank you so much for sharing your time, sharing my kitchen with viewers to talk about this super important subject, because I think we could talk a lot, but the work you've done and that you're doing for decades, in different spaces, has affected parents like me, parents all over our state. So I just honor and thank you for doing that and being here on the show.
Thank you so much for inviting me. And I just have to say right back at you that having more and more colleagues with lived experience, with young families, with older families, with just the diversity, has just made our state richer and our policy better. So it's been a pleasure to work with you
Awesome.
the past few years.
Thank you. Many more to come, hopefully. Touch it. So, well, great. Well, everyone, thank you so much for joining us on Kitchen Conversations. What an incredible conversation. Join us next week, because I can promise you it will be more of the same great policy talk with someone who's a subject matter expert in, I don't want to give it away, but let's just say voting. So I'll see you next week right here, 3 p.m. Have a great